The prairie was quiet that night, the kind of silence that only comes after the wind has carried the dust far into the horizon and left behind a hollow stillness. Her cabin stood alone against the rolling dark, a fragile frame of wood and stone holding back the endless emptiness of the frontier. Inside, Emma Kane stitched by lamplight, her needle moving with the patience of a woman who had nothing but time and memories. It was then that she heard it, at first faint, almost imagined. A dull thud against the door. She froze, her heart catching in her chest, and then it came again, heavier, desperate, a man's weight crashing against the wood. Emma rose, gripping the shotgun from the wall, her bare feet silent against the creaking floorboards. Out here, any sound in the night could mean trouble, thieves, outlaws, or worse. When she pulled the door open, the lantern light spilled onto a broken figure slumped against the frame. A man, his clothes torn and soaked in dust and blood, barely clung to consciousness. In his arms, wrapped in a ragged blanket, was a newborn child. Tiny, fragile, and crying with the thin voice of life itself fighting against the dark. Emma's breath caught. She should have stepped back, should have left him there, an exiled rancher dragging his curse into her home. Everyone in these parts had heard whispers of him. Caleb McGraw, a man run off his land, hunted by enemies both seen and unseen. They said his downfall was his own making, that greed and violence had followed him like a storm. But now, seeing him broken, with an innocent child clutched to his chest, Emma felt something stir inside her, a piece of her own past she had buried too deep. Help. Caleb rasped, his voice cracked as his knees buckled. She dropped the gun and caught him before he hit the ground. The baby's cries pierced the silence, demanding more than either of them could give. Emma dragged Caleb inside, her strength born of necessity rather than choice. She laid him down near the fire, her hands trembling as she checked his wounds. A bullet had grazed his side, deep enough to bleed but not enough to kill, if treated. His face was sunken, his eyes hollow from days without food or water. The baby cried louder. Emma turned, her mind flashing back to a grave on a lonely hill not far from the cabin. She had once held a child too, long ago, and buried both her dreams and her heart in the cold earth beside him. The memory had nearly destroyed her, but here fate had laid another child at her doorstep. She gathered the infant in her arms, feeling the tiny chest rise and fall against her. He was barely clinging to life, skin pale, lips trembling in the night air. Without thinking, Emma rocked him gently, whispering words she hadn't spoken in years. "You'll be safe now." "I won't let the dark take you," the man stirred, his cracked voice breaking the moment. "They'll come. For me, don't let them take him." His hand reached weakly toward her, trembling with desperation. Emma looked into his eyes, eyes that had seen betrayal, exile, and pain. And she made a decision she didn't yet understand. She laid the baby against her shoulder, pressed her lips together, and nodded. "Rest," she told him softly. "You're not dying on my floor." Not tonight. Outside, the night deepened, and the prairie stretched silent and watchful. But inside that lonely cabin, 3 lives, one broken, one fragile, and one hardened by grief, were about to become entangled in a story written by survival, vengeance, and a faint, flickering hope. The dawn broke pale over the prairie, a thin wash of gold spilling across the dry earth. Inside the cabin, the fire had died down to embers, the faint glow licking at the stones like the last breath of a tired soul. Emma rose before the sun fully claimed the sky, her body stiff from a night spent half awake, listening for intruders, for riders, for the sound of death knocking again at her door. The man, Caleb McGraw, lay restless on the floor, his breath shallow but steady. His shirt had dried stiff with blood where she had cleaned his wound, and she had done what she could with boiled cloth and the old jar of whiskey hidden in her cupboard. The smell of spirits clung to her hands, and beneath it, the faint, sour scent of sickness. He would need rest, maybe more than she could give. Out here, there was no doctor for 30 miles. The baby stirred in the corner, wrapped in the blanket Emma had once kept for winters. She moved quickly to him, her hands both sure and hesitant. He was so small it frightened her, so much life bound up in something so fragile. His eyes, half opened, searched the air as though he already knew the world was cruel. Emma had no milk to give, but she warmed a small tin of water and sweetened it with the last of her sugar. The child drank weakly, his tiny fists clutching the fabric as though life itself could slip away if he let go. When Caleb awoke, it was with a start. His hand darted toward the empty holster at his side, and his eyes flared with the panic of a hunted man. Emma was standing by the hearth holding the baby. She turned and met his gaze without fear. "You're safe," she said, her voice calm, steady. "No one's coming through that door unless I let them." Caleb blinked, his breath ragged. His eyes fell to the child, and something inside him broke all over again. "Is he—" "He's alive," Emma said. "Barely, but alive. What's his name?" The question seemed to strike him harder than the bullet had. He swallowed, his throat working. "Elias," he whispered finally. "My boy." Emma looked down at the infant. Elias, a name heavy with promise. Though the world had already set its teeth against him. Caleb tried to push himself up, groaning, but Emma was at his side in a heartbeat, pressing him back down with firm hands. "You'll tear yourself apart," she warned. "You're no good to him dead." "I can't stay here," he muttered. His voice carried the weight of fear and shame. "They'll find me. They'll kill me. And if they know he's here—" Emma cut him off. "If you walk out that door now, neither of you will see the next sunrise." For a moment the silence between them was heavy, broken only by the crackle of dying embers and the faint whimper of the child. Caleb turned his head away, his jaw tightening, as if swallowing words too bitter to say. Emma studied him. His face was weathered, not by years alone, but by loss. His hands were the hands of a rancher, calloused, strong, meant for work, but now they trembled with exhaustion. She remembered the stories told in town, how Caleb McGraw had once owned the richest grazing land along the river, how he had stood tall until enemies circled like wolves and stripped him of everything. They said he had killed men, that blood stained his name. Yet here he was, clinging to life with nothing left but a child. Emma placed Elias back in his makeshift crib and poured Caleb a tin cup of water. He drank slowly, every swallow pained, but when the cup was empty, his eyes met hers again. There was no arrogance there, no defiance, only the quiet desperation of a man with nothing left to lose. "Why?" he asked suddenly, his voice rough. "Why help me? You don't even know me." Emma looked at him, and for a moment the mask she wore cracked. The answer was simple, but it tore at old wounds. "Because once someone left me to die, and I swore I'd never do the same to another soul if I could help it." She turned away before he could reply, busying herself with the fire, with anything but the memories clawing at her chest. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and quiet, but Emma knew better than to trust its stillness. The kind of men who hunted Caleb McGraw would not give up easily. And if they came riding, guns in hand, she would have to choose whether to send him away or to stand beside him. For now, though, the choice was simpler. Keep them alive through the day, and in that fragile, temporary safety, a new bond began to form, not of trust, not yet, but of shared survival. A broken man, his newborn child, and a woman who had already lost too much, bound together by the cruel mercy of fate. The days that followed blurred together, stitched by necessity rather than peace. Emma tended Caleb's wound as best she could, changing the cloth when it soaked through, boiling water until her kettle blackened with soot. His strength returned slowly, unevenly. He could sit up by the second day, stand for moments by the third, though each step was marked by pain. But what frightened Emma most was not the wound. It was his silence. Caleb rarely spoke, and when he did, it was only of the child. He watched Emma cradle Elias, feed him, rock him, with a gaze torn between gratitude and torment. At night, when Emma thought him asleep, she would see him leaning against the wall, his hand resting on the baby's tiny chest, as though reassuring himself that the boy was real and breathing. On the fourth night, when the firelight painted their faces in flickering shadows, Emma finally broke the silence. "You should tell me who's after you." Caleb's jaw tightened. His eyes stayed on the flames. If I know the truth, Emma pressed, I'll know what's coming through that door. Otherwise, we're both blind. For a long time he said nothing. Then, with a voice hoarse from days of swallowing his story, he began. I had land, he said. A good stretch by the river. Grass thick enough to keep cattle fat through winter. Water enough to outlast a drought. Men envied me for it. And when envy wasn't enough, they came with papers, laws twisted in their favor. I fought it. I thought I could win. Emma studied his profile, the sharp lines of a man hardened by pride and regret. They called me stubborn. They called me a thief for keeping what was mine. Then one night riders came, burned my barn, shot my cattle in the field, left a warning on my fence. His voice faltered, and for a moment he looked smaller, not the outlaw townsfolk whispered about, but a man gutted by grief. My wife, she tried to run with the boy. She didn't make it past the yard. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by Elias's soft breathing from the crib. Emma's hands trembled in her lap, not because of his story alone, but because she recognized the same wound in him that she carried in herself. The grave silence left behind when love was buried too soon. I buried her under the cottonwood tree, Caleb whispered. And then I ran. They wanted me gone. Said the law was on their side. Said I had no place in that valley anymore. Exiled, they called it. A neat word for theft. Emma felt the anger rise in her chest, though it wasn't hers to own. She had lived long enough in the West to know that the law bent under the weight of gold and greed. Men with enough money could buy judges, marshals, whole towns. And men like Caleb, men who held on to what was theirs with bare hands and pride, were crushed under boots and ink. And now? She asked quietly. They won't stop, Caleb said. His eyes lifted to hers, dark and unyielding. Not until I'm dead, and not until they're sure my boy won't come back one day to claim what's his. The words struck her harder than she expected. The child in the crib, barely clinging to life, already bore the weight of vengeance not his own. Emma rose suddenly, needing air, needing distance from the firelight and the stories it unearthed. She stepped outside, the night sharp against her skin. The prairie stretched vast and silent, stars scattered across the heavens like cold lanterns. And yet, beneath the stillness, she felt it, eyes watching, somewhere out there in the dark. Her hand tightened on the shotgun she had carried outside. She scanned the horizon, every shadow a threat, every whisper of wind a rider's approach. Nothing moved, and yet she knew. It was only a matter of time. Behind her, the door creaked, and Caleb stepped out, leaning against the frame. He looked weary, his body still failing him, but his hand rested steady on the revolver Emma had found tucked in his saddlebag. They'll come soon, he said, as if reading her thoughts. They'll want to finish what they started. Emma turned to him, her eyes fierce under the starlight. Then we'd better be ready. For the first time, he looked at her not as a stranger who had saved his life, but as something more, a partner in survival, bound by the same cruel hand of fate. Inside, Elias whimpered, his cry thin but insistent, pulling them both back into the cabin. Emma lifted him, pressing the boy against her shoulder, rocking him with a tenderness she thought she had buried forever. Caleb watched, and something in his face softened, though the weight of vengeance still pressed on his shoulders. The prairie was silent again, but Emma no longer trusted the silence. It was the quiet before the storm, the moment when wolves circled just beyond sight, and when the storm broke. She knew this cabin, her fragile refuge, would become the battleground where 3 broken lives would decide if hope was stronger than the darkness hunting them. You know, 99.4% of you watching aren't subscribed yet. Only 0.5% have joined the ride. Don't miss out. Hit subscribe and become part of the story. The prairie changed before dawn. The air carried a weight Emma could feel in her bones, as if the land itself held its breath. She rose early, unable to shake the unease curling in her chest, and stepped out into the cold air. The horizon glowed faint with the first fingers of light, and in the distance she caught it, the faint, unmistakable trace of dust rising against the pale sky. Riders. Her stomach sank, though her face betrayed nothing. She went back inside, where Caleb sat near the fire, his revolver across his knees. He looked at her, and her silence was enough. He followed her to the door, his eyes narrowing as he too saw the dust. "They found me," he muttered. "No," Emma said, her voice sharp. "They found us." He turned to her, his expression caught between protest and understanding, but Emma was already moving. She stoked the fire higher, boiled water, set out bandages. She placed her shotgun on the table and checked the shells, then looked to the revolver Caleb carried. "How many bullets?" she asked. "5, he answered. 5 for them," she said. "And 1 for mercy, if it comes to it." The weight of her words hung heavy, but Caleb didn't flinch. He had seen enough of the world to know mercy sometimes came at the end of a barrel. Elias stirred, his cry sharp in the tension. Emma lifted him, cradling him close. She pressed her lips to his head, breathing in the fragile warmth of life that didn't deserve the darkness gathering outside. "Listen to me," Caleb said, his voice low and urgent. "If they breach that door, you take him and run out the back. Don't stop, don't look back. I'll hold them." Emma's eyes flashed. "You think I'll leave you to be butchered while I run into the wild with a babe in my arms? I've buried 1 child already. I won't bury another, and I won't stand by another grave." Their gazes locked, and for the first time, Caleb saw that Emma Kane was not a woman of pity or fragile kindness. She was forged of fire and loss, and her will was steel. The sound of hooves carried closer, slow at first, then louder, pounding like war drums. Shadows stretched across the horizon until 6 riders emerged, their forms black against the rising sun. They rode with purpose, their rifles glinting. Emma closed the shutters, darkening the cabin. She and Caleb took their places, she by the window, he near the door, both hearts pounding in time with the hooves outside. Elias whimpered, but Emma tucked him in the cradle and laid a hand on his chest, whispering a prayer that was half promise, half curse. The riders dismounted, boots crunching against the dry earth. Silence followed, too long, too heavy. Then a voice rang out, harsh and commanding. "McGraw, we know you're in there. Come out now, and maybe the woman lives." Emma felt Caleb stiffen beside her. She shook her head sharply. "They're bluffing." "They'd kill us both either way," the voice called again. "Your land is gone, your cattle gone, your wife in the ground. Don't make us put your boy there, too. Hand him over, and maybe you'll breathe another day." Caleb's breath caught, fury burning behind his eyes. Emma touched his arm, grounding him. "They want you angry," she whispered. "Angry men make mistakes," another rider spoke, his tone cruel, mocking. "Funny thing, McGraw. You run like a dog, but you carry that pup like he's worth more than the land you lost. What's he gonna do when he grows? A bastard with nothing but your cursed name." Emma's hands tightened on the shotgun. She thought of the grave she had dug years ago, of the child she had laid to rest with trembling hands. Rage simmered beneath her grief, turning cold and sharp. She would not let this boy, Elias, be broken by the same cruelty. Caleb stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "You'll have to come and take him." The words ignited the air. Boots shuffled, spurs clinked, rifles cocked. The first shot cracked, splintering the frame of the window where Emma crouched. She didn't hesitate. She returned fire, the shotgun roaring through the cabin, the recoil slamming against her shoulder. A cry followed outside, one man dropping to the dirt. Chaos erupted. Bullets tore through the walls, splinters flying. Caleb fired through the cracks, his revolver barking with grim precision. He hit another rider, sending him sprawling, his horse screaming as it bolted. Inside, the cabin filled with smoke and firelight. Elias cried, his wail rising above the thunder of gunfire. Emma's heart tore at the sound, but her hands stayed steady, her aim cold and sure. She had nothing left to lose but this child, and that made her the most dangerous kind of woman. Minutes stretched like hours. When her shotgun clicked empty, she reloaded with trembling fingers, sweat dripping into her eyes. Caleb's revolver was nearly spent, each shot fired with the weight of survival. Outside, the riders regrouped, their shouts carrying through the smoke. "Burn them out!" One of them yelled. Emma's blood froze. Fire, the weapon that had already taken so much from her, now threatened again. She pictured the flames devouring the cabin, Elias trapped inside, his cry silenced by smoke. Her body went cold, but her spirit flared hot. "Not this time," she whispered. Caleb's last bullet rang out, silencing another voice outside. He turned to her, empty gun in hand, sweat and blood streaking his face. "If they torch us, it's over." Emma's eyes blazed in the firelight. "Then we take the fight to them." She handed him the shotgun, snatched the axe from beside the hearth, and pushed the door open before fear could chain her steps. The dawn outside exploded into chaos, riders scrambling, smoke rising from torches. Emma charged, the axe gleaming, a cry tearing from her throat that carried all the grief she had buried and all the fury she had left. And for the first time since exile, Caleb McGraw followed not as a man fleeing his past, but as a father and fighter standing for the only thing left that mattered. The battle for hope had begun. The dawn sky had turned blood red by the time Emma Kane burst through the cabin door with the axe in her hands. The prairie wind caught her hair, whipping it around her face, and the cry that tore from her chest was not a sound of fear, but of defiance. A roar born from years of grief, finally given form. The riders reeled at the sight. They had expected a beaten man, a woman cowering inside with a child. Instead, they saw a fury carved into flesh and bone, a widow who had already stared death in the eyes and refused to look away again. The nearest rider swung his torch toward her, but before the flame could touch her, Emma brought the axe down. The crack of bone and wood meeting was swallowed by the man's scream as he tumbled from the saddle, the torch rolling into the dirt, snuffed out by the dry earth. Behind her, Caleb staggered out, the shotgun braced against his shoulder. He fired both barrels into the chaos, dropping another man clean from his horse. The blast echoed across the plain like thunder rolling from the mountains. His chest heaved, his wound tearing fresh. But his eyes burned with something Emma hadn't seen before: purpose. The fight became a storm. One rider swung his rifle like a club, catching Caleb across the back. Caleb fell to his knees, groaning, the shotgun clattering to the dirt. The rider raised the rifle again, but Emma was there first, the axe biting into the man's leg, sending him screaming to the ground. She wrenched the weapon free and swung again, the rage in her arms carrying more weight than any blade could hold. Gunfire cracked from the remaining riders. Bullets tore splinters from the cabin walls, kicked up dirt around their feet. Emma dove behind the water trough, her breath ragged, her hands slick with blood that wasn't all hers. Caleb crawled beside her, his revolver still empty, his strength nearly spent. "Emma," he rasped. "Get Elias." "Run," her eyes blazed. "No, if we run, they'll follow. If we stand, maybe he grows up with a chance." She peered over the trough, counting. 2 riders left, one with a rifle, one drawing his pistol as he circled wide. Her heart pounded in her ears. She had 2 shells left in the shotgun. That was it. She looked at Caleb, his face pale, sweat dripping into the dirt. He knew as well as she did. This was the end, one way or another. "On 3, she whispered. He gave a weak nod, gripping the axe with what little strength remained. 1. The riders closed in, their horses snorting, their voices sharp with confidence. 2. The prairie air held still, the moment suspended like a hanging noose. 3. Emma rose, the shotgun leveled, and fired. The first shell caught the rider with the pistol square in the chest, throwing him from his saddle. She swung the barrel to the second and squeezed again. The shot tore through the man's shoulder, spinning him sideways. His horse bolted, dragging him across the dirt before he crashed still. Silence. The world stilled, the storm broken. Smoke hung in the air, acrid and heavy. Emma's arms shook, the shotgun empty, the fight drained from her body. Caleb stumbled forward, dragging himself past the fallen men, his breath ragged, his steps uneven. He kicked away their weapons, ensuring none would rise again. When it was done, he collapsed to his knees in the dirt, his hands braced, blood dripping from his side. Emma hurried to him, catching him before he fell fully. "Stay with me," she begged, her voice breaking for the first time. "Stay, Caleb." His eyes fluttered, and for a moment she thought death had already claimed him. But then he looked at her, really looked. And in his broken whisper was more strength than the body holding it. "You saved him," he said. "You gave him more than I ever could." His gaze drifted toward the cabin, where Elias's cry cut faintly through the smoke-stained air. Promise me. Promise me he won't carry my curse. Emma's throat closed. She wanted to promise more, that Caleb would live, that the three of them could find a life beyond the ashes. But she was no liar, and the truth hung heavy between them. I'll raise him, she whispered, tears cutting down her dirt-streaked face. He'll know he was loved. He'll know his father fought for him. Caleb's hand gripped hers, strong for a final moment, then slackened as the strength left him. His body slumped, and the prairie swallowed his last breath. Emma pressed her forehead to his, her tears wetting his hair, the silence around them broken only by the wind that carried his soul into the endless sky. When she finally rose, the sun had climbed higher, burning away the mist. The battlefield around her was littered with the men who had come to finish one life and instead lost their own. She wiped her face with a trembling hand and went back into the cabin. Elias lay in the cradle, crying, his tiny fists clenched tight. Emma lifted him, holding him close to her chest, her heart thundering beneath his fragile weight. She kissed his head, whispering words into his soft hair. You'll grow strong, stronger than the land that tried to take you, stronger than the men who tried to bury you. I'll see to it. She looked out the door, where the horizon stretched wide and cruel. The world was no safer than it had been yesterday, but in her arms was something worth fighting for again. Emma Kane had lost everything once, but now, with Elias pressed against her heart, she carried hope once more. Not the fragile hope of dreams, but the hard, blood-forged hope that comes only from surviving the fire and choosing to live anyway. And as the wind swept across the prairie, carrying away the smoke of the fallen, she knew one thing for certain. Exile had ended at her door, but something far stronger had been born there.